What do you need to know if you receive a civil money penalty or no tobacco sale order complaint? We'll tell you in this special 5-part edition of FDA's Tobacco Compliance Webinars. Welcome to this edition of FDA's Tobacco Compliance Webinars. Education and information for retailers and small businesses, sponsored by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration and the Center for Tobacco Products. I'm David Racine. Thanks for joining us. The FDA has created this multi-part webinar called CMP and NTSO Complaints to assist you, retailers and small businesses who have received a civil money penalty or a no tobacco sale order complaint, which we also refer to as CMPs and NTSOs. Now we'll cover this topic in 5 parts. This episode is part 1, Introduction to CMP and NTSO Complaints. In part 2, we'll cover how to pay a CMP using the online payment portal. Part 3 covers how to file an answer and the consequences for not filing an answer. Part 4 reviews the settlement process, and Part 5 will go over the hearing process, including what happens before the hearing is conducted, during the hearing itself, and after the hearing. Now, all 5 webinars are available on the FDA Tobacco Compliance Webinars webpage. To access the webinars, visit www.fda.gov and type FDA Tobacco Compliance Webinars in the search bar. Follow the FDA Tobacco Compliance Webinars link in the search results to find all available webinars. And the webinars are organized by year. Now, let's start the first webinar. I'm joined by Lieutenant Brian Thomas from the Office of Compliance and Enforcement. Lieutenant Thomas will present the Introduction to CMP and NTSO Complaints. Lieutenant Thomas?
Thanks, Captain Racine. This webinar, the first in our series of 5, will focus on CMP and NTSO complaints. Specifically, we will discuss what is a civil money penalty, also known as a CMP, what is a no tobacco sale order, also known as an NTSO, and what is a complaint. Included in this discussion will be a description of what is in a complaint, a description of the documents that accompany the complaint, and an explanation of what happens after you receive a complaint. A civil money penalty, or CMP, is simply a monetary sum assessed for violations of the law. The Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, known as the Fda Act, gives FDA the authority to assess a CMP for violations of certain requirements of the Act. The monetary sum assessed is based on a published penalty schedule, and the amount varies depending upon how many violations of the tobacco regulations occur during a specified period. Because FDA's Center for Tobacco Products counts violations of the regulations when determining the CMP amount, an inspection could result in more than one violation. If a retailer is found to have violated certain requirements of the Fda Act as listed in the complaint, they may be liable for the amount of the CMP sought. A no tobacco sale order, or NTSO, is an order prohibiting the sale of tobacco products at a retail establishment. A retailer who has repeated violations of the tobacco regulations may be subject to an NTSO order. Repeated violations are defined as 5 violations of certain tobacco regulations within a 36-month period that constitute a repeated violation. The maximum NTSO period that CTP intends to seek is 30 days for the first NTSO, 6 months for the second NTSO, and an indefinite period for the third or subsequent NTSO. FDA has compiled a glossary of common terms that you will encounter when dealing with CMPs and NTSOs. Please feel free to use this glossary when viewing this webinar series or when reading your CMP or NTSO complaint. The glossary is available as a download at the Tobacco Compliance Webinars page on the FDA website, We'll remind you how to find that website at the end of this webinar. Now, we'll discuss what a CMP or an NTSO complaint is, what you'll receive with your complaint, and what happens after the complaint is delivered to you. Retailers receive CMP or NTSO complaints when the FDA's Center for Tobacco Products has evidence that indicates an establishment violated the Tobacco Control Act. The FDA's Center for Tobacco Products initiates a CMP or NTSO action by serving a complaint upon the retailer or its representative. Serving the complaint simply means that the complaint has been delivered to you. In most cases, you will receive your complaint at your retail establishment through a mailing service such as UPS or the U.S. Postal Service. Now, let's turn our attention to the complaint itself. A complaint is the legal document that identifies the statutory or regulatory violations that are the basis for seeking a CMP or NTSO. In other words, the complaint tells you the information that FDA's Center for Tobacco Products is using to seek the CMP or NTSO. The complaint also identifies the amount of the CMP or the duration of the NTSO that FDA's Center for Tobacco Products is seeking. The complaint has several sections that provide important specific information. The first section is called the introduction. The introduction identifies the parties to the complaint. In a CMP or an NTSO action, the parties are the FDA's Center for Tobacco Products and the retailer. The introduction also sets forth the amount of the CMP sought or the duration of the NTSO sought. The next section of the complaint is called the Legal Authority section. The Legal Authority section sets forth the laws governing the sale and distribution of tobacco products and the authority for a CMP and/or NTSO. This is the first page of a sample CMP complaint. On the far right side, it is titled Administrative Complaint for Civil Money Penalty. An NTSO complaint looks just like a CMP complaint, except it is titled Administrative Complaint for No Tobacco Sale Order. As you can see, the heading or the caption identifies you, the retailer, as the respondent for this complaint. Throughout the CMP or NTSO process, you will be referred to as the respondent, and the Center for Tobacco Products at FDA will be referred to as the complainant. The caption also lists the docket numbers for the complaint. We will discuss docket numbers in more detail later in this presentation. The first page of the complaint contains the introduction section and begins the legal authority section. The current allegations section of the complaint, among other things, provides the most recent facts and circumstances forming the basis for the action. It sets forth the name and address of your establishment. In CMP complaints, this section also provides the brand names of the tobacco products that were involved in the violation, the dates and times of the most recent violations, and the specific laws that you allegedly violated. The previous case history section provides information about the retailer's previous CMP and NTSO history, including the dates and specific regulatory violations alleged in previous complaints, and the outcome of those actions. If this is your first CMP, there will not be a previous case history section. The complaint will also have a section titled Responding to the Complaint. This section provides you with specific information on how and when to respond to the complaint. If you choose to contest the matter, you must take action within 30 days of receiving the complaint by filing an answer or successfully requesting an extension. If you take no action, you could be issued a default judgment. Answers, extensions, and default judgments will be explained in detail in our third webinar, How to File an Answer and Consequences for Not Filing an Answer. The complaint also informs you that you have the right, but are not required, to obtain an attorney to represent you in this case. Your complaint will be accompanied by several documents. One of them is the cover letter. The cover letter is addressed to your retail establishment. The subject line of the cover letter will state whether a CMP or NTSO complaint is included, and will include your establishment name and street address, case docket numbers, and the retailer case number. Docket numbers and the retailer case number are used to identify your case and are used in filing documents, when paying CMPs online, during the settlement process, and during the hearing process. We will address when and how you will use docket numbers and retailer case numbers during each relevant webinar in this series of 5 webinars. The cover letter also sets forth the amount of the CMP or duration of the NTSO sought and provides contact information for the FDA's Center for Tobacco Products. The cover letter also outlines the various options for responding to the complaint. These options are: Option 1. Acknowledge that the violations occurred and pay the full penalty amount. This option exists only for CMP cases. Please view the second webinar in this series, How to Pay a CMP Using the Online Payment Portal, to learn more about the acknowledgement and payment process. Option 2. Settlement. Please view the fourth webinar, The Settlement Process, to learn more. Option 3. Request a hearing. We cover that in the fifth webinar, The Hearing Process. And Option 4. Request an extension of time to file an answer. Watch the third webinar, How to File an Answer and Consequences for Not Filing an Answer, to learn more. Finally, you will find information on how to submit documents. In addition to the cover letter, FDA's Center for Tobacco Products encloses with the complaint inspection documents and photos related to the most recent inspection that led to the CMP or NTSO action. For example, you may see a report by the inspector, photos of the evidence collected during the inspection, or a photo of your retail establishment from the outside. Once the complaint has been delivered to you, the FDA's Center for Tobacco Products files the complaint with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Departmental Appeals Board, also known as the DAB. Filing means submitting a copy of the complaint to the DAB. The filing of a complaint for a CMP or NTSO officially opens an administrative enforcement action. The DAB employs several administrative law judges, also known as ALJs, in its Civil Remedies Division, or CRD. The CRD ALJs provide impartial, independent review of administrative actions such as CMP and NTSO cases. The ALJs are qualified under the Federal Administrative Procedure Act to conduct hearings on the record. For more information regarding the DAB, visit the DAB website at the link provided in the slide. A CRD ALJ will be assigned to each complaint filed with the DAB. The ALJ determines the procedures and the outcomes of the complaint based on submissions from both sides. Once the DAB has a copy of the complaint and the ALJ is assigned, the ALJ will send information about the procedures to be followed for each specific case to you and the FDA's Center for Tobacco Products. The roles and responsibilities of the ALJs are discussed in more detail in the webinar on the hearing process. This concludes our introduction to CMP and NTSO complaints. To summarize the material we have covered in this webinar, we have defined a CMP. We have defined an NTSO. We have discussed what a complaint is and what information is included in a complaint. We reviewed what is included in the cover letter and other documents that accompany a complaint. We have discussed the entity that conducts CMP and NTSO hearings. And finally, we provided you a glossary of terms that may be helpful as you watch the other webinars in this series, or as you read through the CMP or NTSO complaint that was delivered to you. Now that we've covered the basics of a CMP and NTSO complaint, we encourage you to view the other webinars in the series to help you understand the CMP and NTSO complaint processes. The remaining webinars are Part 2, How to Pay a CMP Using the Online Payment Portal. Part 3, How to File an Answer and Consequences for Not Filing an Answer. Part 4, The Settlement Process. And Part 5, The Hearing Process. We have additional webinars available to provide more detailed background information regarding CMPs and NTSOs, such as how violations are counted and what amount of CMP or duration of NTSO may be assessed. In particular, please watch Retail Compliance Check Inspections, an overview for tobacco retailers from 2016, and Guidance for Industry, determination of the period covered by a no tobacco sale order and compliance with an order from 2015. You can find these webinars on the same Tobacco Compliance Webinars page as this webinar. As a reminder, you can find all of our webinars by typing FDA Tobacco Compliance Webinars in the search bar on the main FDA homepage. Thank you for watching Part 1 of our webinar on CMP and NTSO complaints, brought to you by the FDA's Center for Tobacco Products, whose mission is to protect our kids and the nation's health from the dangers of tobacco.
In Part 2 of our 5-part webinar, CMP and NTSO Complaints, Carolyn Lockheed with the Office of Compliance and Enforcement will review how to pay a civil money penalty using the online payment portal. Coming up now in this edition of FDA's Tobacco Compliance Webinars.
Thank you for watching Part 2 of our webinar on CMP and NTSO complaints. I'm Carolyn Lockheed with CTP's Office of Compliance and Enforcement. This is the second webinar in the series of 5 webinars to assist you, retailers and small businesses that have received a complaint seeking a civil money penalty, also referred to as a CMP, or a no tobacco sale order, also referred to as an NTSO. This episode explains how to pay your CMP using the online acknowledgement and payment portal. FDA has created 5 separate webinars in this series. The other topics in this series are Part 1, Introduction to CMP and NTSO Complaints. Part 3, How to File an Answer and Consequences for Not Filing an Answer. Part 4, The Settlement Process. And Part 5, The Hearing Process, including what happens before the hearing is conducted, during the hearing, and after the hearing. All 5 webinars are available on FDA's Tobacco Compliance Webinars page. To access the webinars, visit www.fda.gov and type FDA Tobacco Compliance Webinars in the search bar. Follow the FDA Tobacco Compliance Webinars link in the search results to find all available webinars. The webinars are organized by year. You can watch all 5 webinars in order or skip ahead to a webinar topic of your choice. Once you receive a CMP complaint, one of the options you have is to pay the full amount of the penalty requested by FDA's Center for Tobacco Products. You can also have a settlement conference with FDA's Center for Tobacco Products to discuss factors that might help mitigate or reduce the penalty. The settlement process is covered in detail in webinar number 4. If you request a hearing and a decision by the administrative law judge, any penalties assessed by the administrative law judge can be paid through the online payment portal. The hearing process is covered in detail in webinar 5. During this webinar, we will discuss how to access the online acknowledgement and payment portal to pay your civil money penalty, or CMP, using your assigned FDA docket number and retailer case number, submitting the required online acknowledgement form, and submitting payment online through the U.S. Department of Treasury's pay.gov website. To pay a CMP, the easiest and preferred method is to pay online. To pay online, first you must access the FDA's Center for Tobacco Products Civil Money Penalties Acknowledgement and Payment Portal, located at the web address provided in this slide. Please note, scheduled maintenance of the website usually occurs on the first business day of each month. If you receive a message that the system is not available due to scheduled maintenance, please try to access the system again after 24 hours. If you need immediate assistance, you can contact the FDA's Center for Tobacco Products at the phone number or email address provided on this screen. Please provide your FDA docket number when calling or emailing. You can find the FDA docket number and retailer case number on the cover letter that accompanied the complaint for your case. After navigating to the portal and reviewing the system terms of use notice, click the radio button next to I understand below the notice to proceed. You will then be directed to the case search screen. First, you will need the FDA docket number and retailer case number. You can find these numbers on the cover letter that accompanied the complaint for your case. When entering the FDA docket number in the case search screen, you must use capital letters and dashes as they appear on the cover letter. It is important that you enter the FDA docket number and the retailer case number carefully, as both numbers must match the system to find your case. Once you have entered the FDA docket number and the retailer case number, click the Search button. After entering the proper FDA docket number and retailer case number, the portal displays an acknowledgement form that corresponds to your CMP. Review the information and verify that the case information is correct, including the balance. If there are errors, please contact the FDA Center for Tobacco Products using the phone number or email shown on this slide. You must submit an online acknowledgement form before making payment. The online acknowledgement form has several required fields into which you must enter information. The red boxes on this slide denote required fields. You must complete all the required fields in the acknowledgement form to proceed to the payment page. We will now go through each required field. The acknowledgement form requires you to agree to a series of statements. Please take time to read each statement carefully. By checking the box next to each statement, you are acknowledging that 1. You are authorized to settle claims on behalf of the retail establishment. 2. All of the violations contained in the complaint, including any warning letter violations referenced in the complaint, occurred. 3. Sufficient payment will be made to settle the matter. 4. You waive your ability to contest the violations in the future. And 5. The acknowledged violations may be counted in determining the establishment's total number of violations in future enforcement actions. If you are not willing to acknowledge each of these statements, you are responsible for filing an answer within 30 days of receiving the complaint. Next, enter your first name and last name in the provided fields. This serves as your electronic signature. By entering your name here, you acknowledge that your online consent is equivalent to a binding legal signature. Then, select your title from the Title drop-down list. Your title is a required field and must be provided to proceed. If your title is not in the drop-down list, please stop and contact FDA Center for Tobacco Products at the phone number or email address provided on this slide. You will then be required to enter your phone number. The extension field is optional. You will also be permitted to enter your email address. Although the email address field is optional, providing an email address may assist FDA Center for Tobacco Products in contacting you if the need arises. You may also enter your address if your mailing address is different from that of the retail establishment noted at the top of the page. These address fields are optional. Once you have completed all required information on the online acknowledgement form, click I agree. By clicking the I agree button, you consent to the use of the electronic signature to execute the acknowledgement form. The electronic signature will have the same legal effect, validity, and enforceability as a handwritten signature. After the acknowledgement form is submitted, the case summary page displays. Click the Print Form button to view, save, or print a copy of the signed acknowledgement form. After clicking the Print Form button, a new window opens with a printable version of the acknowledgement form. You may want to print the form for your records. Once you have completed an online acknowledgement form, you can begin the payment process. To begin the payment process, click the Pay Penalty button on the case summary page. After clicking the Pay Penalty button, you'll be directed to the warning screen shown on this slide. The penalty amount in the warning screen should match the amount of the CMP sought in the complaint. If you participated in the settlement process with the FDA Center for Tobacco Products, then the penalty amount on the warning screen should match the amount that you agreed upon during your discussions. As mentioned earlier, information on the settlement process can be found in Webinar 4. If the ALJ assessed a penalty in a decision, the amount in the warning screen should match the amount assessed by the ALJ. If the penalty amount is incorrect, click Cancel and contact the FDA Center for Tobacco Products using the contact information on this slide. If the penalty amount is correct, click OK. You will then be directed to the Payment Methods page. On this page, you will be given the option to make payment online. The Payment Methods page also allows users to print an invoice. You are not required to print an invoice, but if you wish to print an invoice for your records, click the Print Invoice button to view, save, and/or print a copy of the invoice. Click the Pay Now button at the bottom left corner on the Payment Methods page to make an online payment via electronic check or credit card. Available online payment methods include electronic check, also known as e-check, or credit card payment through Discover, Visa, MasterCard, and American Express. You can also make payment by mail with a check or money order. Instructions on how to pay by mail will be displayed on the screen. If you decide to pay through these methods, checks and money orders must be made payable to the United States Treasury. If the Pay Now button doesn't display, contact FDA Center for Tobacco Products for further instructions. After clicking Pay Now, a new window opens for the U.S. Department of the Treasury's pay.gov website. Once the payment process is completed through pay.gov, pay.gov generates a pay.gov tracking ID confirming that the payment has been submitted. You should keep this tracking number for your records. The pay.gov tracking ID is not a confirmation that the FDA has received and processed the payment. It can take up to 2 business days for the payment to process. Once your payment has been processed, FDA Center for Tobacco Products will send you a written acknowledgement of the payment. The Departmental Appeals Board, or DAB, may also send you documents relating to the closing of the case. Please keep these documents for your records. If you have any questions regarding these documents, please contact the FDA Center for Tobacco Products at the phone number or the email address provided on this screen. This concludes our discussion of how to pay your civil money penalty online. To summarize the material we have covered in this webinar, we discussed how to access the online acknowledgement and payment portal. We demonstrated how to submit an online acknowledgement form. We reviewed the steps for paying the penalty, and we examined how to print an invoice for your records. Now that we've covered the basics of how to pay your civil money penalty online, we encourage you to visit the other webinars in the series if you have additional questions regarding a CMP or NTSO. The first webinar in this series was an introduction to civil money penalty and no tobacco sale order complaints. The remaining webinars in this series are Part 3, how to file an answer and consequences for not filing an answer, Part 4, the settlement process, and Part 5, the hearing process. All 5 webinars are available on the FDA Tobacco Compliance Webinars page. To access the webinars, visit www.fda.gov and type FDA Tobacco Compliance Webinars in the search bar. Follow the FDA Tobacco Compliance Webinars link in the search results to find all available webinars. The webinars are organized by year. Thank you for watching Part 2 of our webinar on CMP and NTSO complaints, brought to you by the FDA Center for Tobacco Products, whose mission is to protect our kids and the nation's health from the dangers of tobacco.
In Part 3 of our 5-part webinar, CMP and NTSO Complaints, Dominic Markward with the Office of Compliance and Enforcement reviews how to file an answer and the consequences for not filing an answer for those who've received a civil money penalty or no tobacco sale order complaint. Coming up now in this edition of FDA's Tobacco Compliance Webinars.
Thank you for watching Part 3 of our webinar on CMP and NTSO complaints. I'm Dominic Markward with CTP's Office of Compliance and Enforcement. The FDA has created a series of 5 webinars to assist you, retailers and small businesses who have received an administrative complaint seeking a CMP, also referred to as a civil money penalty, or an NTSO, also referred to as a no tobacco sale order. This webinar is the 3rd webinar in the series. In this webinar, we will focus on how to file an answer and the consequences for not filing an answer. The 5 webinars in this series will cover Part 1, Introduction to CMP and NTSO Complaints, including a list of common terms compiled into a glossary and general information on what retailers can do after receiving a complaint. Part 2, how to pay a CMP using the online payment portal. Part 4, the settlement process. And Part 5, the hearing process, including what happens before the hearing is conducted, during the hearing, and after the hearing. All 5 webinars are available on the FDA Tobacco Compliance Webinars page. To access the webinars, visit www.fda.gov, type FDA Tobacco Compliance Webinars in the search bar. Follow the FDA Tobacco Compliance Webinars link in the search results to find all available webinars. The webinars are organized by year. You can watch all 5 webinars in order or skip ahead to a webinar topic of your choice. In this webinar, we will discuss what an answer is and what it should include, deadline for filing an answer, how to file your answer using the Departmental Appeals Board, or DAB, electronic filing system, the initial order establishing procedures, or IOEP, and the guidance establishing procedures, or GEP, requesting an extension of the deadline to file an answer, and consequences for failing to file an answer. Our first topic of discussion is, what is an answer? An answer is a formal response to the CMP or NTSO complaint. More specifically, it is a legal document that you will file with the DAB that either admits or denies the allegations in the complaint. When we say file, we mean officially submitting your response to the DAB using your case information. Your answer should include written responses admitting or denying the allegations in the current allegations section of the complaint. Please note, if you do not expressly deny an allegation in the complaint, it will be considered to be an admission. In your answer, you can disagree with some or all of the allegations in the complaint. You may also disagree with the penalty sought. You should include in your answer the reasons you believe the amount of the CMP or the duration of the NTSO should be less than what is sought. Your answer will be considered a request for a hearing unless you explicitly waive the right to a hearing. We will discuss hearings more in depth in the 5th webinar in our series titled The Hearing Process. You must file or submit your answer to the DAB within 30 calendar days after receiving the complaint or request an extension. Requests for extension will be discussed later in this presentation. Remember, filing means submitting your document to the DAB to your specific case file. Please note that the answer is considered filed when it is received by the DAB. Your answer must be submitted to the DAB. Administrative law judges, or ALJs, from the DAB Civil Remedies Division preside over CMP and NTSO cases. Their role in CMP and NTSO cases is discussed in detail in our first webinar. If you did not view the first webinar, you may want to view it to have a better understanding of the ALJ's role in this process. The DAB asks that you submit your answer using its electronic filing system. The system is called the DAB e-file. In order to use DAB e-file, you first have to go to the DAB e-file website and register for an account. Instructions on how to register and use DAB e-file can be found on the DAB e-file welcome page. You will need an email address, business address, and phone number. If you require further technical assistance, you can also email the DAB with your questions. You can contact the DAB at the email address provided on the slide. If you are not able to submit your answer electronically, you may request a waiver from, meaning ask permission of, the ALJ assigned to your case to allow you to submit your answer by mail instead of through the electronic system. But remember, you must file your answer within 30 calendar days of receiving the complaints. So if you need to request a waiver, you should do so as soon as practicable after you receive your complaint. You must submit your waiver request by mail, and your request must explain why you are unable to file your answer electronically. The address to send a written request for a waiver from e-filing will be provided to you in the cover letter that accompanies the complaint. The address is also contained in documents sent to you by the ALJ. We will discuss these documents in the next slide. The ALJ will notify you if your request for a waiver from e-filing is granted. Please note that regardless of your request, you are still responsible for meeting all deadlines set by the ALJ. Generally, after the FDA Center for Tobacco Products files a copy of the complaint with the DAB will assign an ALJ to the case, and that judge will send you and the FDA Center for Tobacco Products a document that may be called an Initial Order Establishing Procedures, the IOEP, or the Guidance Establishing Procedures, the GEP. Some ALJs issue the IOEP and others prefer the GEP. The IOEP and the GEP serve the same purpose. These documents notify you of the date by which you must file your answer. This date is very important. Later on in this webinar, we will discuss some potential negative consequences if you fail to meet this deadline. The IOEP or GEP will usually provide a form to help you submit your answer. You are not required to use this form. The form is provided for your convenience to give a sample format for your answer. If you are unable to submit your answer within 30 calendar days of receiving the complaint, you may request an extension. In your request for the extension, you must explain why you need the additional time to file your answer. The ALJ may grant an extension of up to 30 additional days, but only if good cause is shown. A request for an extension of time to file an answer must be filed within 30 days of receiving the complaint. Much like the process for submitting an answer, you must first register with the DAB to request access to DAB e-file to file your request for an extension electronically. Please follow the same procedures described earlier in this presentation for filing an answer to request access to DAB e-file or to request a waiver from the electronic filing requirement. A request for extension is not automatically granted. The ALJ will issue an order notifying both parties if the extension has been granted or denied. Unless the ALJ grants your request for an extension of time, you must submit your answer by the original due date. So again, if you need additional time, you should file your extension request as soon as practicable after you receive the complaint. Regardless of whether you submit your answer through DAB e-file or whether you receive a waiver and submit it by mail, it is important to file your answer by the deadline. The deadline is either within 30 calendar days of receiving the complaint or by the date determined by the ALJ if an extension is granted. If you receive an IOEP or a GEP, it will also include your deadline to request an extension or submit your answer. Failure to submit a timely answer may result in the ALJ issuing an initial default judgment. An initial default judgment is a written decision issued by the ALJ that can occur if you do not meet documented deadlines. It finds the allegations listed in the complaint to be true and imposes the full penalty requested in the complaint. In other words, if you fail to meet your obligation to file an answer within 30 calendar days, an initial default judgment will be issued against you, in which the ALJ will find you responsible for all of the violations alleged in the complaint and will impose the CMP or the NTSO as requested by FDA's Center for Tobacco Products. The default judgment is binding 30 days after it is issued by the ALJ unless it is timely appealed. You can avoid a default judgment by taking one of four actions. 1. Filing your answer by the due date, or 2. Successfully requesting an extension of time to file an answer and meeting any new deadlines that the ALJ establishes, or 3. Acknowledging and paying the full CMP amount or agree to an NTSO duration before the deadline for you to file an answer, or 4. settling your case with the FDA's Center for Tobacco Products before the deadline for you to file an answer. The settlement process is discussed in more detail in our fourth webinar in this series. An initial default judgment becomes final and binding 30 days after it is issued unless you file a timely appeal to the DAB or a motion to reopen the case with the ALJ. When the ALJ issues a decision, you will be provided with information on appeals. Once a default judgment becomes final, you are responsible for paying the CMP amount specified in the final decision or complying with the NTSO. For a default judgment of an NTSO complaint, you will receive a letter from FDA Center for Tobacco Products with the dates of your NTSO period during which you are prohibited from selling tobacco products to anyone. This concludes our discussion of how to file an answer and consequences for not filing an answer. To summarize, we have discussed what an answer is and what an answer should contain, the due dates for filing an answer, the DAB filing requirements, including DAB e-file and how to request a waiver from electronic filing requirements, the initial order establishing procedures, or IOEP, and the guidance establishing procedures, or GEP, how to request an extension of time to file your answer, and finally, consequences for failing to file an answer. Now that we've covered the basics of answering a CMP or NTSO complaint, we encourage you to view the other webinars in the series to help you better understand the CMP and NTSO processes. The previous webinars in this series were Part 1, Introduction to CMP and NTSO Complaints, and Part 2, How to Pay Your CMP Using the Online Payment Portal. The remaining webinars are Part 4, the Settlement Process, and Part 5, the Hearing Process. All 5 webinars are available on the FDA Tobacco Compliance Webinars page. To access the webinars, visit www.fda.gov and type FDA Tobacco Compliance Webinars in the search bar. Follow the FDA Tobacco Compliance Webinars link in the search results to find all available webinars. The webinars are organized by year. Thank you for watching Part 3 of our webinar on CMP and NTSO complaints, brought to you by the FDA's Center for Tobacco Products, whose mission is to protect our kids and the nation's health from the dangers of tobacco.
In Part 4 of our 5-part webinar, CMP and NTSO Complaints, Rosemary Purcell with the Office of Compliance and Enforcement provides those who've received a civil money penalty or no tobacco sale order complaint with an overview of the settlement process. Coming up now in this edition of FDA's Tobacco Compliance Webinars.
Thank you for watching Part 4 of our webinar on CMP and NTSO complaints. I'm Rosemary Purcell with CTP's Office of Compliance and Enforcement. This webinar is the 4th in a series of 5 webinars to assist retailers who have received a complaint for a CMP, also referred to as a civil money penalty, or an NTSO, also referred to as a no tobacco sale order. Throughout this webinar, we will focus on the settlement process for CMPs and NTSOs. The FDA has created 5 separate webinars in this series. The other webinars are Part 1, Introduction to CMP and NTSO Complaints. Part 2, How to Pay a CMP Using the Online Payment Portal. Part 3, How to File an Answer and the Consequences for Not Filing an Answer. And Part 5, the hearing process, including what happens before the hearing is conducted, during the hearing, and after the hearing. All 5 webinars are available on the FDA Tobacco Compliance Webinars page. Type FDA Tobacco Compliance Webinars in the search bar on the main FDA homepage and follow the FDA Tobacco Compliance Webinars link in search results. Webinars are organized by year. You can watch all 5 webinars in succession, or you can skip ahead to a webinar or topic of your choice. During this webinar, we will focus on how you can settle your CMP or NTSO case with the FDA's Center for Tobacco Products. Specifically, we will discuss what is settlement, what is a settlement conference, what will be discussed during the settlement conference, and what is the settlement agreement. So what is settlement? A settlement conference is simply a meeting between you and the FDA's Center for Tobacco Products to discuss your case. Settlement discussions are an efficient method for resolving your case without proceeding to a hearing. You can resolve your CMP or NTSO case through settlement, where you and FDA's Center for Tobacco Products agree to a reduced penalty amount or NTSO period. Settlement can occur at any time after you have received your complaint and before a final decision has been reached in your case. If settlement cannot be reached, your case will proceed through the hearing process. We will discuss the hearing process in detail in the 5th webinar. A settlement conference takes place by telephone only. Settlement conferences are not held in person. To settle your case, you must contact FDA's Center for Tobacco Products and arrange for a settlement conference. The purpose of a settlement conference is for both sides to discuss the appropriateness of the penalty sought. These settlement conferences are typically informal. If you are represented by an attorney, FDA's Center for Tobacco Products will communicate with you through your attorney, so your attorney should attend the settlement conference. To request a settlement conference, you can contact FDA's Center for Tobacco Products by phone or email. The contact information is listed on the slide. Contact information and additional details on how to resolve your case outside of a hearing by scheduling a settlement conference are outlined in the cover letter that accompanies the complaint sent to you by the FDA's Center for Tobacco Products. When you contact the FDA's Center for Tobacco Products, please provide your name, your contact information, and the FDA docket number. The FDA docket number can be found on the cover letter that accompanies your complaint. Once you provide FDA's Center for Tobacco Products with your contact information and FDA docket number, we will contact you to set up a mutually agreeable date and time to discuss your case. Who participates in the settlement conference? You, the retailer, your attorney, if you have one, FDA's Center for Tobacco Products representatives. Now let's turn our attention to what is discussed during the settlement conference. During the settlement conference, you should be prepared to discuss any specific facts or circumstances that you feel should reduce your CMP amount or NTSO period. These are called mitigating factors. The following are some examples of information or facts that might be considered during settlement discussions. These factors are also the same factors that the administrative law judge, or ALJ, would be required to consider at the hearing. The ability to pay the penalty. This may include, but is not limited to, information related to income, assets, and information about revenue from tobacco sales. The effect the proposed penalty has on the retail establishment's ability to continue to do business. The history of prior violations at the establishment. The degree of culpability. As the owner of the retail establishment, you are responsible for the actions of your employees. Any fine or penalty you already have paid to your state for the same violation. Any other unique circumstances that you believe should lower the penalty amount or NTSO duration. We encourage you to inform FDA's Center for Tobacco Products of these facts during the settlement conferences, as they may help FDA's Center for Tobacco Products in determining an appropriate settlement for the case. Additionally, if you have taken steps to prevent future sales of tobacco products to minors, it is very important that you inform FDA's Center for Tobacco Products of such actions. We will now look at some examples of mitigating factors that have helped to reduce penalties sought during settlement conferences. Establishing disciplinary sanctions for employees who sell tobacco products to minors or violate other tobacco regulations. Additional employee training regarding sale of tobacco products, including preventing sales to minors. Requiring employees to verify age by way of photographic identification using an electronic scanning device. Or enrollment in voluntary compliance check programs, also known as secret shopper programs. This list of examples is not exhaustive. You may have implemented other policies or changes that help prevent sales of tobacco products to minors. If that is the case, you should inform FDA's Center for Tobacco Products of those measures. FDA's Center for Tobacco Products may request documents to support any facts or circumstances that help reduce a penalty during settlement discussions. Examples of such documents include financial documents related to tobacco sales and revenue, showing how much of your total revenue is made up of tobacco sales. Documents related to financial hardship that you may be having. Documentation of any actions you have taken to ensure compliance after receiving a warning letter, CMP, or NTSO in the past. This list of examples is not exhaustive. FDA's Center for Tobacco Products may request, and you may propose, other documents or evidence that could help in settlement discussions. Now let's discuss what happens if you and the FDA's Center for Tobacco Products agree to settle your case. The next few slides will discuss the settlement agreement, separately for CMPs and NTSOs, because the process is slightly different for each. Let's start with CMPs. If you reach a settlement with FDA's Center for Tobacco Products for a CMP complaint, you will receive a letter summarizing the settlement discussions. Your letter will include the agreed upon reduced penalty amount, the date that the payment is due, and detailed instructions on how to acknowledge the violations in the CMP complaint and pay the agreed upon amount. Remember, all CMP should be paid through the online payment portal unless alternate arrangements were made during the settlement conference. For more detailed instructions on using the online payment portal, please watch our second webinar in this series, How to Pay a CMP Using the Online Portal. Once you acknowledge the violations and FDA receives payment, we will notify the ALJ by submitting a document called the Notice of Settlement Agreement, or NSA. The NSA will state that your case was resolved through the settlement agreement. You have made sufficient payment, you acknowledge that the violations outlined in the CMP complaint occurred, and request that the ALJ close the case. The FDA's Center for Tobacco Products will send you a paper copy of the NSA when it is filed with the Departmental Appeals Board, or DAB. Now let's discuss the settlement agreement for an NTSO complaint. If you reach an agreement with the FDA's Center for Tobacco Products for an NTSO complaint, FDA's Center for Tobacco Products will send you the settlement agreement for signature. The settlement agreement will require acknowledgement of the violations alleged in the complaint and will contain all the agreed-upon terms of settlement, including the agreed-upon NTSO duration and the start and end dates for the NTSO. The settlement agreement will also specify a penalty for failing to meet the terms of the agreement. The settlement agreement must be signed by the retailer and returned to FDA's Center for Tobacco Products by the requested due date. Failure to do so may void the agreement. Once FDA's Center for Tobacco Products receives the signed settlement agreement from you, the FDA assigned attorney will then sign the settlement agreement. This signed settlement agreement with both signatures notifies the court that you and the FDA's Center for Tobacco Products have reached a settlement in your case. FDA Center for Tobacco Products will file the signed settlement agreement with the DAB and will mail you a copy of the settlement agreement filed with DAB. As previously discussed in this webinar, settlement can occur at any time after you have received a complaint and before a final decision has been reached for your case. However, the settlement process is separate from the hearing process. Your participation in the settlement process does not delay any deadline set by the ALJ. You must meet all the ALJ set deadlines and requirements associated with your case until the notice of settlement agreement is filed and the ALJ officially closes your case. This includes the requirement that you submit an answer within 30 days after receiving the complaint. Please view the third webinar in our series, How to File an Answer and Consequences for Not Filing an Answer, during which we discuss the process for submitting an answer. If an answer is filed by the deadline, but no settlement is reached, the case will proceed through the hearing process. Please view our fifth and last webinar in this series, The Hearing Process, for more information. This concludes our discussion on settling a CMP or NTSO. To summarize the material that we have covered in this webinar, we have discussed what settlement is and when it can occur. We have explained what the settlement conference is and how to request one. We discussed mitigating factors that could help reduce your penalty. And we have described the notice of settlement agreement, when the notice is sent to you and what the notice contains. Please remember, the notice of settlement agreement starts the process of closing your case, and that process differs slightly depending on whether you receive a CMP or an NTSO complaint. Now that we've covered the basics of the settlement conference process for CMP or NTSO complaint, we encourage you to visit the other webinars in the series to help you understand the CMP and NTSO complaint process. The previous webinars in this series were Part 1, Introduction to CMP and NTSO Complaints. Part 2, How to Pay Your CMP Using the Online Portal. Part 3, How to File an Answer and Consequences for Not Filing an Answer. The remaining webinar will explore Part 5, The Hearing Process. All 5 webinars are available on the FDA Tobacco Compliance Webinars page. To access the webinars, visit www.fda.gov and type FDA Tobacco Compliance Webinars in the search bar. Follow the FDA Tobacco Compliance Webinars link in the search results to find all available webinars. The webinars are organized by year. Thank you for watching Part 4 of our webinar on CMP and NTSO complaints, brought to you by the FDA's Center for Tobacco Products, whose mission is to protect our kids and the nation's health from the dangers of tobacco.
In Part 5 of our 5-part webinar, CMP and NTSO Complaints, Jessica Tierney with the Office of Compliance and Enforcement will go over the hearing process for those who've received a civil money penalty or no tobacco sale order complaint, including what happens before the hearing is conducted, during the hearing itself, and after the hearing. Coming up now in this edition of FDA's Tobacco Compliance Webinars.
Thank you for watching Part 5 of our webinar on CMP and NTSO complaints. I'm Jessica Tierney with CTP's Office of Compliance and Enforcement. This webinar is the last in a series of 5 webinars for retailers and small businesses. This webinar will focus on understanding the civil money penalty, also referred to as a CMP, and no tobacco sale order, or NTSO, complaint processes. Specifically, we will focus on the hearings process for CMP and NTSOs. The other 4 webinars focus on Part 1, Introduction to CMP and NTSO Complaints, including a list of common terms compiled into a glossary and general information on what retailers can do after receiving a complaint. Part 2, How to pay a CMP using the online payment portal. Part 3, How to file an answer and the consequences for not filing an answer. And Part 4, the settlement process. All 5 webinars are available on the FDA Tobacco Compliance Webinars page. To access the webinars, visit www.fda.gov and type FDA Tobacco Compliance Webinars in the search bar. Follow the FDA Tobacco Compliance Webinars link in the search results to find all available webinars. The webinars are organized by year. You can watch all 5 webinars in order or skip ahead to a webinar topic of your choice. During this webinar, we will discuss what is a hearing, how to request a hearing, who conducts the hearing, what happens once a hearing is requested, what happens at the hearing, and what happens after the hearing. Retailers have the right to a fair and impartial hearing to determine the outcome of a CMP or NTSO complaint. Hearings are a formal process conducted on the record to help an administrative law judge or ALJ determine whether a retailer is responsible for a CMP or NTSO. If the ALJ decides that the retailer is responsible, the hearing will also help him or her in determining the appropriate amount of a CMP or the duration of the NTSO by considering any mitigating factors. You can have an attorney represent you during the hearings process, but it is not required. The hearing process begins when you submit an answer to the complaint. Filing an answer or requesting an extension to file an answer are discussed in the 3rd webinar in this series, titled How to File an Answer and Consequences for Not Filing an Answer. As explained in the How to File an Answer and Consequences for Not Filing an Answer webinar, your timely filed answer is considered a request for a hearing unless you state otherwise. If you waive the right to a hearing, the presiding ALJ may decide the outcome of the complaint based on documents and arguments submitted by you and FDA's Center for Tobacco Products. Hearings are conducted in accordance with rules set forth in Part 17 of Title 21 of the Code of Federal Regulations. The regulations can be found at the website address listed on the slide. Or using your internet browser, you may use the search terms Code of Federal Regulations, Title 21, Part 17, to find the regulations that set out the procedures for CMP and NTSO hearings. CMP and NTSO hearings are conducted by the Civil Remedies Division of the Department of Health and Human Services Departmental Appeals Board. We also refer to them as the CRD. The CRD employs ALJs to oversee these cases. An ALJ is the presiding officer in an administrative hearing. The ALJ is impartial, independent, and qualified to conduct the hearings on the record. Some examples of an ALJ's responsibilities include setting the date and time of the hearing and deciding requests for extensions, receiving evidence as part of the hearing, issuing rulings on admissibility of the evidence, in other words, deciding what evidence is allowed to be considered, controlling the course of the hearing and the conduct of the parties, ruling on procedural and other motions, determining whether the retailer is responsible for the violations alleged in the complaint, and determining the appropriate amount of the CMP or duration of the NTSO. An ALJ is not responsible for conducting settlement negotiations. However, the settlement process and hearing process can occur simultaneously. Our 4th webinar in this series explains the settlement process with FDA's Center for Tobacco Products. Now let's move on to what happens once you request a hearing by filing an answer. Once your answer is filed, the ALJ will send the retailer and FDA's Center for Tobacco Products an order. The order is often called an acknowledgement and pre-hearing order. The title and format of this order can vary depending on which ALJ has been assigned your case. Generally, the pre-hearing order tells you and FDA's Center for Tobacco Products the procedures for presenting evidence and arguments in the case. It also lays out important deadlines for the different steps both sides have to take before a hearing date. For the purposes of this webinar, we will call this order the pre-hearing order. Here's a sample of what you might see when you get the order. More specifically, the pre-hearing order notifies you and FDA Center for Tobacco Products of the name and contact information of the staff attorney assisting the ALJ. Summarizes the documents that FDA's Center for Tobacco Products and the retailer must file or submit to each other and to the ALJ. Establishes due dates for submitting documents and provides format requirements for such documents, such as page limits, procedures for marking of exhibits, and how to send documents to the ALJ and to the other party. Pre-hearing orders also establish procedures for discovery of documents. Discovery is a process by which a retailer or FDA Center for Tobacco Products makes a written request to the other party to produce documents that are relevant to the issues before the ALJ. Here's an example of what a pre-hearing order may say about discovery. Pre-hearing orders will also state that both parties must submit a pre-hearing exchange, describe the contents of such pre-hearing exchange, and provide the deadline for each party's pre-hearing exchange. The pre-hearing exchange may require the submission of an informal brief. The informal brief will answer a series of questions relating to the specific issues that the ALJ must resolve to decide the case. If required, you or your attorney, if you are represented, must respond to the questions on the pre-hearing order attachment titled Informal Brief of Respondent. CTP will supply responses to the questions in the attachment titled Informal Brief of Complainant. The pre-hearing order will require each party to also submit a list of proposed witnesses and its exhibits, which must include any documents the party intends to use during the hearing and the sworn written direct testimony of any witness the party intends to rely upon. It is important that you submit your pre-hearing exchange, including the informal brief if required, witness and exhibit list, and exhibits by the due date set forth in the pre-hearing order. The DAB provides free language access services and translations throughout the process. Pre-hearing orders also provide information on how to access the DAB's language services. This service is available for free if retailers require assistance communicating effectively with the ALJ during the hearing process. If your pre-hearing order does not provide you with information on language access services, you can contact the DAB at 1-844-880-5720 for assistance. It is important to read through all the requirements set forth in the ALJ's pre-hearing order. Failing to meet these requirements may result in consequences, such as sanctions, which can include the ALJ finding you liable and imposing the full penalty sought by FDA's Center for Tobacco Products. If you have any questions about any of the ALJ's orders, the ALJ's staff attorney can assist you. Submitting an answer is only the first step towards obtaining a hearing, and additional steps have to happen before the ALJ will schedule a hearing date. Prior to the hearing, the assigned ALJ may hold a pre-hearing conference or meeting with you and FDA's Center for Tobacco Products. Not all ALJs hold pre-hearing conferences, but most ALJs do, and they will inform both parties of a pre-hearing conference date and time by mail or e-file notification. The pre-hearing conference is conducted by telephone. The ALJ will issue a separate order with a date and time for the conference as well as a conference call number. During the conference, the ALJ will clarify the issues to be decided at the hearing, identify the witnesses who will be questioned during the hearing, who will be the witnesses each party identified in its pre-hearing exchange, and for whom the parties had timely submitted their written sworn direct testimony, and set a date and time for the hearing that is acceptable to all participants. Now that we have discussed what happens before the hearing, we'll now discuss what happens at the hearing itself. When the hearing is conducted, the following people will usually be in attendance: the ALJ, who presides over the hearing, staff attorney, who is assigned to assist the ALJ, an attorney from FDA's Office of Chief Counsel on behalf of the Center for Tobacco Products, and representatives from the FDA's Center for Tobacco Products. You, the respondent, your attorney, if you have one representing you, witnesses for both sides, and a court reporter to record the hearing. Like the pre-hearing conference, hearings take place over the telephone. All participants and witnesses are required to call a conference call number. The ALJ will send you a document with the hearing date, time, and the conference call number. If you have special circumstances that would make a telephone hearing impractical, please contact the ALJ staff attorney as soon as possible. As a reminder, the staff attorney's contact information can be found in the pre-hearing order. During the hearing, the parties can present evidence in the form of documents or through witness testimony. Documentary evidence is included in the parties' pre-hearing exchange that is filed prior to the hearing. Documentary evidence can include photographs, videos, reports, and sworn witness statements. These documents are also referred to as exhibits. Witness testimony is made under oath. It is important to remember that each party must submit the sworn direct testimony of all their witnesses in writing with their pre-hearing exchange. At the hearing, the other party may question the witnesses about their written testimony. This is called cross-examination and is the only oral testimony allowed at the hearing. The respondent or their attorney will be permitted to pose questions to FDA's Center for Tobacco Products witnesses, and FDA's Center for Tobacco Products can pose questions to respondents' witnesses. The presiding ALJ will determine what evidence and exhibits can be considered in the hearing. The ALJ will not make a final decision about liability for the CMP or NTSO or the amount of the CMP or length of the NTSO at the hearing. The ALJ's written final decision is issued after the hearing is conducted and post-hearing briefing, if any, discussed in more detail shortly. Let's now discuss what happens once the hearing is complete. After the hearing is complete and the presiding ALJ has accepted evidence into the record, a written transcript of the hearing will be produced. The retailer and FDA's Center for Tobacco Products reviews the written transcript. Once the transcript is available, the parties will be given the opportunity to submit a document called a post-hearing brief. A post-hearing brief is submitted after the hearing is complete. It may discuss what happened at the hearing, and it may summarize any arguments or legal issues regarding the facts of the case. The ALJ will set a due date for the post-hearing briefs once the transcript becomes available. After the post-hearing briefs are submitted, the presiding ALJ will consider all arguments and evidence presented in the case. The ALJ will then issue a ruling called an initial decision. The initial decision will contain the ALJ's findings regarding whether the allegations in the complaint are true, whether your actions violated the law, whether you are liable for the charged CMP or NTSO, and if liable, what is the appropriate amount of the CMP or duration of the NTSO. If the presiding ALJ finds you are liable for a CMP, the initial decision will set forth the amount of the monetary penalty and will explain when the decision becomes final and binding on both parties. FDA's Center for Tobacco Products will notify you by letter when the penalty is due. If the presiding ALJ finds you are liable for NTSO, the initial decision will set forth the number of days that the NTSO will be in effect. FDA's Center for Tobacco Products will notify you separately by letter of the exact dates that the NTSO will be in effect. If the presiding ALJ finds the retailer is not liable for the alleged violations in the CMP or NTSO complaint, the ALJ will not assess a CMP amount or order an NTSO. If the retailer or FDA Center for Tobacco Products is not satisfied with the ALJ's decision, either party can appeal the initial decision to the DAB. Appeals must be submitted within 30 days after the initial decision is issued. And how to appeal the decision is included with the initial decision that is mailed to the retailer and FDA Center for Tobacco Products. This concludes our discussion of the CMP and NTSO hearing process. To summarize the material we have covered in this webinar, we have discussed how you can request a hearing by filing an answer, the ALJ who presides over the hearing and the ALJ's responsibilities, what happens before your hearing date. Specifically, we discussed the ALJ's pre-hearing order, discovery, the pre-hearing exchange, including the informal brief, if required, the witness and evidence list, the evidence including sworn direct witness testimony, and the pre-hearing conference. What happens at the hearing, including how the hearing is conducted, who attends the hearing, and how documents are presented by both parties. What happens after the hearing, which includes release and review of the hearing transcript, submission of post-hearing briefs, the ALJ's initial decision, and the ability to appeal the ALJ's initial decision. Now that we've covered the procedures involved in CMP and NTSO hearings, we encourage you to visit the other webinars in the series to help you understand the CMP and NTSO complaint process. The previous webinars in the series are Part 1, Introduction to CMP and NTSO Complaints. Part 2, How to Pay a CMP Using the Online Payment Portal. Part 3, How to File an Answer and Consequences for Not Filing an Answer. And Part 4, The Settlement Process. All 5 webinars are available on the FDA's Tobacco Compliance Webinars page. To access the webinars, visit www.fda.gov and type FDA Tobacco Compliance Webinars in the search bar. Follow the FDA Tobacco Compliance Webinars link in the search results to find all available webinars. The webinars are organized by year. Thank you for watching Part 5 of our webinar on CMP and NTSO complaints, brought to you by the FDA's Center for Tobacco Products, whose mission is to protect our kids and the nation's health from the dangers of tobacco.